Gods are supposed to be eternal, above politics, beyond conquest, but history tells a more human story where divinity is not only worshipped but captured, renamed, and reassigned. This is the story of the orphaned gods, deities that once ruled cities and hearts, only to be defeated, annexed, and quietly absorbed by the very empires that destroyed them. Because when kingdoms fall, their gods don't always die. Sometimes they're adopted. Let us begin in Mesopotamia, where the practice has ancient roots. When the Assyrians conquered Babylon in the 8th century BCE, they didn't just loot gold, they looted divinity. The statue of Marduk, Babylon's supreme deity, was seized and paraded through Nineveh. To the Babylonians, this was a theological catastrophe. To the Assyrians, it was policy. The god was not destroyed, he was relocated, repositioned, symbolically subordinated. In doing so, the Assyrians sent a message older than iron: we own your heaven now. This was not just psychological warfare, it was infrastructural. The captured statue disrupted rituals, halted festivals, broke calendars. It severed the people's link to divine time, divine space, divine identity. And when Marduk was eventually returned, it was under new terms. He was still a god, but now a god who had knelt. This strategy rippled forward. The Hittites did it, the Egyptians did it, the Romans perfected it. By the time Rome became an empire, it had amassed a staggering divine portfolio. It didn't just conquer land, it acquired pantheons. Greek gods were Romanized Zeus, became Jupiter Hera, became Juno, Ares, became Mars. But this was more than translation, it was transformation. The Romans didn't just rename the gods, they made them administrators. Jupiter wasn't just a storm god, he became a legal authority. Mars wasn't just war, he was discipline, agriculture, order. Venus, once a minor fertility figure, was elevated into the matron of empire. And beneath this divine assimilation, local gods were either fused with Roman counterparts or demoted into folklore. The Celtic goddess Brigid, once central to pre-Christian Ireland, became Saint Brigid. The Germanic Ostara, a goddess of dawn and rebirth, lent her name and symbols, hare's eggs, to what would become Easter. This wasn't kindness, it was policy. A polytheistic version of empire building: keep your gods, but let us manage their careers. By the time Spanish ships landed in the Americas, the practice had grown teeth. The conquistadors came with cross and crown, but their conquest didn't end at the sword. It extended into altars, into myths, into the skin of gods themselves. Aztec temples were razed, their stones reused to build cathedrals. But even in rubble, the gods refused to die. Instead, they reappeared draped in new robes. The Virgin of Guadalupe is the most famous example. She emerged in 1531, a dark-skinned apparition to an indigenous man named Juan Diego. Her shrine was erected on the former site of the temple to Tonantzin, the Mexica Earth Mother. Her symbols, moon, stars, flowers, mirrored those of the goddess she replaced. To the colonizers, this was proof of divine endorsement. To the colonized, it was something stranger, survival through disguise, and it didn't end there. The Maya, the Inca, the Taino all saw their gods absorbed or masked. Catholic saints began to resemble old deities. Local festivals were renamed but kept their sacred timing. A spring fertility rite became a feast for Saint Isidore. A rain god statue was left in a chapel's corner, unmentioned but never removed. It was not submission, it was syncretism, a refusal to forget hidden in plain sight. The same happened in Africa, and then again in the Americas, this time via the Atlantic slave trade. When millions of Africans were taken to the New World, they brought their deities, orishas, vodun, spirits, ancestral powers. But plantation owners forbade non-Christian worship. So the enslaved adapted. They paired their gods with Catholic saints Ogun, with St. George, Yemaya, with the Virgin Mary, Shango, with St. Barbara. To outsiders, it looked like conversion. To insiders, it was camouflage. Religions like Santeria Candomblé and Vodou were born of this fusion, not from admiration of European saints, but from necessity. The gods were orphaned, but they found foster identities, just enough to survive, and survive they did. Meanwhile, in the East, conquest took a different shape. In ancient China, dynasties rose and fell, but the gods often remained. New emperors didn't erase the pantheon, they reorganized it. Local earth gods were integrated into state religion. Taoist immortals were standardized. Buddhist bodhisattvas were ranked. The imperial court even published official calendars of sacrifice. Divine bureaucracy mirrored human one. But make no mistake, this was still conquest. Just ritualized, documented, performed in robes instead of armor. The gods could stay, but only if they filed the right paperwork. In the modern era, the orphaning of gods has taken new forms. Colonialism gave way to nationalism, and religion became both a weapon and a casualty. Missionaries carved crosses into lands already full of sacred names. Yet even as they baptized rivers and repainted myths, old deities found new addresses. They moved underground, they danced in festivals, they whispered in lullabies. In Southeast Asia, Buddhist temples host animist shrines at the gate. In India, the British tried to standardize Hinduism, only to discover they'd built a taxonomy over a living forest of stories. In Japan, Shinto kami coexist with Buddhist bodhisattvas and neither ask for exclusivity. The gods that survived conquest didn't survive by winning. They survived by becoming indispensable. And sometimes they came back not as rebels, but as relics of power. In post-revolutionary France, Marianne, the embodiment of liberty, replaced Catholic iconography in civic buildings. But her posture, her robes, her radiance echoes of Roman goddesses. In Soviet Russia, religion was banned, but statues of Lenin replaced icons in family homes. Candles were lit, flowers left beneath his image. Ritual endured, faith was redirected. Even atheism, it turns out, has its saints. And what of today? Tourists pose beside pyramids once soaked in sacred offerings. Deities appear on t-shirts. Thor becomes a Marvel superhero. Kali appears in pop music videos. The gods are not dead. They are merchandised. Their myths trimmed, polished, and exported. But their stories still resist. In marginalized communities, the gods return as memory, as protest, as reclamation. Afro-Caribbean youth revive Vodou, not as nostalgia, but as defiance. Indigenous nations raise effigies not for pageantry, but for sovereignty. In Oaxaca, Andean, Polynesian, and Sami culture spirits, once forbidden, are now retold as ancestors. This is not a revival, it's a reminder that gods do not disappear. They are renamed, reassigned, repositioned, but they wait quietly, patiently beneath monuments and ministries. And perhaps the strangest thing is this: the conquerors too end up changed. Roman soldiers buried with Isis amulets, Victorian missionaries buried with African beads, modern nations crowned with allegories older than their constitutions. Because when you adopt a god, you don't just gain their power, you inherit their memory, and memory, unlike monuments, never stays buried for long.